Hey everybody, welcome back. It's What's Better Than Great. This is Mike.
And Shauna.
And today we're going to talk about co-parenting with an ex. All right, so me and Shauna have children with our exes, and we are actually a blended family. Even though I do call her daughter my daughter, it's a blended family. So she's not my birth daughter. She's my daughter by choice.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, we wanted to talk about this today because we understand how challenging it can be to really have to deal with somebody who's an ex that, you know, maybe the relationship wasn't as healthy or just not it's not something where it's conducive to being able to work together.
Right.
But then you have to parent a whole human being together. And sometimes it's hard.
Some people have really good relationships with their ex-spouse or whatever, and they can manage it. And then you've got a lot of people that have different types of issues, whether the person doesn't want to be involved at all, and you're trying to make sure that both parents are equally involved in the kid's life, because obviously I'm sure that's more beneficial than just one. Or you can have the opposite where both people want to be involved, but they just disagree on how they want to go about parenting. And I think that is extremely difficult because if you can't agree on how you want to teach your child how to become a productive person, there's so many things that happen with a kid. Like they could either just be confused, or they can use you both against each other. Sometimes they can manipulate the situation in their favor, and you know what I mean?
As a matter of fact, that's the most likely thing that's going to happen if you guys cannot get together, which is the biggest pain or the biggest problem that most people face, is that, yes, we both have an issue with talking to each other and actually agreeing on how to co-parent, but the child sees it, whether or not you put it in front of them. They can see the difference that you're not working together, and so they use that to their benefit. And actually, scientifically, they say that children start manipulating their parent before they can even speak, around like 6 months old. Mm-hmm. So think about that, right? If you have a 7-month-old right now, your child will manipulate you by fake crying. And I'm sure that you know that because you can hear the difference. Mm-hmm. But we don't think about it as manipulation. We think about it as like, oh, we just need to give them what they want.
Right.
And as they get older, in order to not kind of, condition your child in a way that makes them think that the best way to handle people is to manipulate them, you have to learn to work together and learn also to recognize a manipulative behavior in the child, because it's not really that child's fault. It's really the parents that kind of created the system that made it possible for them to do it and benefit.
So what happens if you're in a situation where, because I've seen this happen, where the kids are living with one parent, and then you have the other parent who may be in another state, and they're not really making an effort to be involved in the situation. Like, you want them to be there, you want them to be, an equal part of the children's lives, but they just don't. They're obviously not motivated. Maybe they've even started a new family, which I think can be very difficult for children to kind of grasp and deal with. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, how would you work that situation? I mean, the situation that I saw with somebody I know, I think she kind of got to a point where she's just sort of gave up.
Uh-huh.
I don't really know if there's really much you can do at that point. I mean, if they're not trying to...
Right. So for me, right, and this is the thing, like, I look at co-parenting, as two different things when it comes to parenting with the person and being a parent to a child, right? Mm-hmm. Because of the fact that no matter what, the co-parenting is not really the focus. in my opinion, right? Especially if you're not able to work together. This person is never going to do it your way, whether that's because they're trying to hold a grudge and use it against you, or because they just don't agree that the way that you would like to parent is what they would like to do. So each one of y'all being separate makes it so that the focus has to be on, okay, what is parenting in the first place, right? How do I make sure that I'm a good parent to any child, let alone a child that has a parent that isn't with me, right? And so I think that that's really the focus for me, is to say, okay, well, what would I like to instill in my children? What do I want to teach my children? And what's important for them to be able to move forward in life with? And I think that the problem is that everybody has a different idea when they think of that, right? And so I think that for me, my focus is to say, okay, well, a healthy adult would be this, right? And then how do I become this healthy adult so that all of my actions show what a healthy adult is,
what you're trying to teach,
right? And then how do I require that from them and put that in place in terms of a daily practice or a weekly practice?
So for you, it's not necessarily, you would handle the situation by just, moving forward and just taking it on for yourself.
Right. I look at it more like a business arrangement when it comes to the co-parenting thing, because of the fact that if you have a business partner that doesn't necessarily agree with you doing things a certain way, it's not necessarily a healthy business right there, right? But the problem is that doesn't mean that you'd quit, right? And especially in when it comes to business, but especially when it comes to children, you cannot quit anyway, right? It doesn't, there's only so much that we can go back and forth before we have to say, you know what, forget it, you do it your way, I do it mine. As long as what our goals are for our children are met, and as long as our children are being taken care of on both sides of the fence, then I really don't have anything to tell you, because we have two different approaches,
right?
And the hard part about that to me is that I have an ex that I often disagree with when it comes to the way that she parents, because we also have a autistic child. Now, she does things her way, I do mine, and the problem is that I am the type of person that is always trying to think of them as adults, right? And think about things from the perspective of well, in 10 years or 5 years or 20 years, where are they going to be, and what lessons will they need to know in order to handle this smoothly? And with an autistic child, there are already setbacks or things that are going to make it hard to teach.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think that's really the difficulty that I face. But for my other child who's not autistic, a lot of what I do with him is try to teach him how to think, right? Because at this point in his life, I still want him to be able to get as much childhood and that whole have fun, develop your mentality from a child
go
up.
Through the phases of childhood to puberty, and be able to experience those things. Right.
So I don't necessarily, even though I am very focused on making sure that he hits certain goals, I don't try to push him as hard as I would if he was 15, because you're not as even though I think it's important to learn lessons and to know things that adults know from an early age, I think that pushing them too hard in one area or another can make them it can actually work in reverse. You can kind of like the parents who force their children into sports or a certain career field,
and they end up resenting you because they didn't get a chance to really explore what they wanted to do. Right.
So I think that's the hard part for me is balancing. Okay, well, I want you to have fun and I want you to be able to make mistakes and learn and scrape your knee essentially. But I also want to keep you from scraping your knee and then falling off the cliff. You know what I mean? Right. I want to be able to put boundaries around you. enough to where you learn the lesson without it being devastating.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's my way of parenting.
Co-parenting.
Well, before I deal with co-parenting, I have to know what I want. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so that's why I say it like that.
So how you would handle a situation where she, your ex is doing things their way and you won't want to do things your way. I mean, how do you get the child not to be confused? Do you just kind of try to undo everything they're teaching, or what?
Well, no, to be honest with you, I think that a part of it is yes and, right? Like almost like so for you guys who don't know anything about yes and, it's actually something that people use in improv to keep the story moving forward. But what I try to do is basically supplement, right? And sometimes you really can't because it's opposites, right? So for example, if you are if you're not religious and your ex is religious, they're going to be learning from both of you. And so what I try to do in that case is not quite a yes and where I'm adding to the story. What I'm saying is, okay, well now, since I'm giving you an opposite, you have to use your own judgment, right? And that's really, for me, the ultimate thing is this. I want to condition my children to be thinkers. I want them to be able to get information from anywhere and condense it down to saying like, hey, well, what makes the most sense for me, right? And so a big part of it is going to just basically be saying, here is a way to look at it, right? If it's something where you don't agree in terms of co-parenting, here's a way to think about this or a way to look at it. You know what I mean? What do you think? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And just get them in the habit of
thinking
through a problem.
Right.
If it's something where it's not complete opposite, but it's something that you don't necessarily agree with, you can say, yeah, you can do it like that. And you could also try this. Mm-hmm. And you could also try this. You know what I mean? And so ultimately that's a lot of what my parenting style is based on what I saw growing up. My grandparents had a daycare in the house. And so all my life I kind of grew up around children up until I was in high school. And I noticed patterns. And those patterns were often that the parents would technically hold the child back from doing things, right? Or from learning as quickly as they wanted to. And so what I try to do is actually just stay out of the way of that. And to help it to naturally move in the way it wants to move.
So you kind of empower the kids to make their own decisions in order to figure out the best way to get to what their goal is. You challenge them to think about it.
Right. And the good thing about that is that it kind of puts what is important to almost every human being in the center, right? Mm-hmm. Which is autonomy. No one wants to feel controlled.
Right.
Right. And so by influencing their way of thinking, technically I'm giving them control over their outcomes.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which makes it so that you actually develop a stronger, it's a stronger bond, but I'm thinking about a different term. Like you're more influential, right, is the way I guess to say it. You're more influential because of the fact that you are now a mentor. You're not an authority figure that uses your authority to beat them down.
Right.
You're using your authority to give them authority.
Right. Yeah. Allowing them to sort of, like I said, just be empowered to make their own decisions and be able to think for themselves. Because ultimately they're going to have to, you know what I mean?
Right.
I was just thinking of a situation where I've experienced where you'll have they'll make a mistake, or there'll be a problem that comes up and you put them on punishment, and the kid will go to the other parent's house and the other parent refuses to keep them on punishment. So it's almost like I felt like you were constantly undoing everything you were trying to do because they want to make sure they have fun with them, and they don't want to seem like the bad parent because they're just visiting with them.
Right. Right. And you know what? I think, because we have to take a break, I think that's something we'll talk about on the next section. Hold on 1 minute and we'll be right back. Did you know that 32% of Americans listen to podcasts monthly? It's a great way to start a business and share your thoughts on anything you want. Unfortunately, The cost of podcasting equipment and the challenges of editing and distributing your podcast is usually what stops people from getting started. That is until Anchor.fm. If you haven't heard of Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, it can be heard on Apple Podcasts, and a whole lot more. You can make money from your podcast even without having a listenership, right? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. It's everything you need all in one place. So if you're ready to get started with your podcast, download the free Anchor app right now or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm.
All right, so we're back. And so we left off talking about a situation where you put the child on punishment, trying to teach them a lesson about something, and then they go visit the other parent's house and they are not on punishment because that parent refuses to discipline the child. They believe that when they're over their house, it should always be about having a good time, and there's really no room for discipline. So in my situation, I really didn't know how to handle that other than just to, continue the punishment when the child came home. But the problem is that I felt like I was undoing everything that I had tried to do. And then it puts you in a situation where your kid resents you because they're like, well, why is it that I'm not on punishment here, but when I'm with you, it seems like I'm always, or at least some of the time, getting disciplined.
Right. And I think that's the thing that most people who parent that way, where they parent in a way to try to be their child's friend, they don't necessarily think about it as though there's a point to it, right, other than like this moment we're having fun, and that means that the more fun we have, the more she'll like me or he'll like me. Yeah. So, but I think that the problem that most people run into with that is that they essentially don't teach their children anything except for how to have fun.
And I think honestly, as a kid grows older, if you really make it a point to be their mentor and also give them, teach them how to think for themselves, they start to figure it out on their own. Right. Honestly, they start to see like, okay, well, I'm not really learning anything when I'm here. Everything is always about just having a good time. But what am I learning anything about life? Am I learning about how to be, the type of adult that I want to be when I get older? Or, right. And I think it's a good and a bad thing, because I think the respect level is different. And not all children, not all teenagers figure it out, but some do, and some realize that it's not necessarily about the good parent, the bad parent. It's when you're with somebody that's trying to discipline you, it's because they're trying to teach you,
right?
And so I think it becomes a situation where they respect. I think that they respect you more when they know that you're just trying to teach them a lesson.
Right.
It's not like you're just doing it for the sake of disciplining them. You know what I mean? So I think that it's important to keep it going. You know what I mean? Don't feel like, I think it's easy for some parents to feel guilty about not wanting to seem like the bad parent because the other one doesn't, take discipline seriously. But I say stand your ground. You know what I mean? Continue with what you're doing as far as making sure that your kid is learning, and making discipline a part of their parenting. But I think also helping them to see the reasoning is really important.
Right. And I think that's really the main key is if they don't see the reason, then they're not really being disciplined.
Right.
That's something that I learned. I learned it in psychology class, and I also understood it from a child because my mom would always, before I would get in trouble, and this is an old school, so when you get in punishment back then, it was like you would get spanked sometimes, mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But before that, she would make sure it's like, hey, I want to make sure you understand what you did wrong, why I don't want you to do it, why it's not good for you to do as a long-term thing. So we would have these sometimes hour, 2-hour conversations before I get in trouble.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so that really taught me a valuable lesson because it helped me to understand, like, especially after I got into psychology class and I started to really learn how the mind works, it helped me to see, like, oh, this is why you do it, is because the goal of parenting is to train your child to handle the world.
Right.
You know what I mean? How to interact in the world and by...
how to think for themselves, you know what I mean?
Right.
And, how to face challenges.
Right. And so I think that, number one, the problem that a lot of parents who will face when they are co-parenting is that one of them is a disciplinarian and the other one is, like, trying to have fun.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? And the problem with that is that this obviously is two different perspectives of the world. And one of these parents will almost always be, I don't want to say they're childish, because not everyone who's trying to have a lot of fun is childish. Some of them are actually very responsible. But I feel like what they're going to do is look at your life, not just the moments that you interact with them. They're going to look at overall the lifestyle, the life that each parent has and say, okay, well, this person is fun. And they also... have this thing going on that isn't awesome. You know what I mean? And that's something that I realize is, like, children are watching. They're not
right.
They're not actually trying to say, okay, well, I like this person better, or I like that person better.
Yeah, it's
they
not
love
about
you
what
both.
you say, it's about what you do in front of them. So
and they love you both, but the real issue is that they love you both the way that you have shown them that you love.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think that ultimately, and this is something that I learned as an adult after joining the military. When I was little, I grew up with my grandparents, like I said before, and my grandmother was, I mean, she's a grandmother, so she spoils you, right? My grandfather grew up on a farm, and so for him, life is work. Like, he would wake up in the morning, all right, let's get started. We'll cut the grass. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this. You know what I mean? And so it's like, for me, especially as a very young child, I started to say, you know what? I'm just going to avoid him. I'm going to stay away from him as much as possible and just go towards my grandmother because she gives me what I want. Right? So just to point out to you guys, I was manipulating my situation.
Yeah.
What happened is, after I joined the military, all of the things that the military does to you is to get you to stop being spoiled, because it attracts people who have no direction. And the reason why you have no direction is because you were spoiled. You get what I'm saying? And so within a week after we got our first phone call, the first thing I did was call him and say, thank you. I finally get what you were trying to teach me this whole time. And had I understood what I know now, I'd have spent more time with you.
Right.
So don't give up on
because
being the
honestly, if they don't learn now and they don't appreciate it when they're young, like you said, they will appreciate it because life is not, it will definitely, throw you for a loop and you'll learn the hard way, you know, and then it'll dawn on you like, oh, this is what they were trying to teach me. Okay.
Right.
And I think I think that's when you have a level of appreciation for your parents and you see the difference. And it's not necessarily about trying to compare yourself to the other parent, but I think the goal is for them to understand what your reasoning is, you know what I mean? So I think it definitely can be frustrating when you have somebody that you're trying to co-parent with and they just don't agree, or they don't want to agree with anything you're trying to do. But I think just trusting that, if you help your child understand your reasoning, they will get it.
Right.
Have faith in your kid. Like, at some point they're going to get it. If not now, they may hate you when they're young, but when they get older and they start facing life's challenges, they will appreciate it.
Yeah. I would also, because I just thought about this, I would also point out this, because I've also known a lot of people who were disciplinarians that maybe they were disciplinarians because that's what they thought their parents were doing. Like, for example, I've had some family members and like in-laws in my previous relationship that they taught their children in a way that was more like, you're a man, so you got to be tough, and you got to be like this, and you got to be like that, or you're a girl, so you got to be like this, and you got to be like that. The problem that these parents can run into, because I don't want to leave anybody out and just say, oh, you should just be a disciplinarian. The problem that you'll run into is you need to understand that you should also have nurturing, right? And that by, especially when it comes to boys, right? A lot of what people try to do is condition them to be hard. You know what I mean? And the value of there is value in your emotions, right? Even as a boy, and understanding your emotions and understanding, okay, well, what happened to cause the emotion is better than telling your child not to cry because boys aren't supposed to cry. That's not healthy. Yeah. And that can actually lead to more problems than good. Right. What you want to do is understand that everything that you're disciplining them for has a purpose. So if you're the type of parent who grew up with a parent teaching you "'cause I said so" is the reason why you do what you're told, you're probably going to struggle with discipline in the first place, because there's a reaction to that is solely in the control of your child, right? And I'm speaking more to people who so in my life, I've had friends growing up, and most of those friends that were raised to, with a parent that's like, "because I said so," do the dishes or do that and do this. And it's like you're teaching them all the same things that I would teach my kids, but you're doing it from a perspective of, I'm the authority. Almost every one of them, almost every one of the people that I knew growing up that were raised like that had trouble with legal issues. And the reason why is because what you're actually teaching them unconsciously is that you obey authority because they said so, and either they're going to agree with it, or they're going to resent it and try to find ways to hide their wrongdoings, which is essentially criminality, right? So I wanted to say that because it just hit me that I hadn't really spoken about things from the perspective of discipline when it comes to children. So if you're the disciplinarian, you have to make sure that you're disciplining from a perspective of making sure they understand why it's important. And if you're not the disciplinarian, you have to also understand that fun is not going to benefit them in the long term if the only thing they get from you is fun, because of the fact
because reality is that life is not always fun. Right. And what tools are they going to have in life to navigate, any obstacles that come before them if you don't give them those tools.
Right. And so I think that it takes a blend of both fun and discipline and listening as a parent, right? Listening to your child to understand them. If they feel like they can talk to you, no matter which parent you are, you're actually teaching them that they should come to you, right? So everything that you do is also a reward for doing it, right? When it comes to your child. So make sure that you are not unconsciously rewarding them for doing the wrong thing, or rewarding them in a way that would cause them not to want to continue to do the right thing.
Right. And I think the thing to think about with two parents that are doing it differently, and one of them insists on doing it a certain way, it's a control thing. I think when you get to a point where you're arguing and you're trying to force your way of doing things on the other person, at that point it's about control, and there's nobody that wins in that situation. Right. So it's best just to do what it is that you know how to do best, you know what I mean? And think about, what the best interest is for the child as far as how they're gonna live, and what decisions and how decisions they're gonna make, how they're gonna make the decisions when they get older. So I would say just don't try to get into a control war with the other parent, because children can see that, you know what I mean, and then they learn how to they learn how to resolve conflict by watching you.
Right. And I think that the easiest way to do that is to remember that technically both of you are trying to do the same thing from different perspectives, right? Neither one of you wants to do anything to harm your child, right? At least if you're both technically healthy parents, even if you guys can't work together,
Right.
you know what I mean, for whatever reason. I think that the main thing is this person doesn't want to hurt the child, just like you don't want to hurt the child. So understanding that we're both trying to accomplish the same thing, even though we don't agree, is what will keep you from having, or at least going into the whole negative thing. And understanding that you are in control of you, they're in control of them. And while your child is with this person, you don't have control. So you have to say, okay, well, whatever you're going to do is what you're going to do. And I am also going to have to react to it. You know what I mean? So if your child is, for example, I have, you know, I don't want to put this on anybody. So I'm going to say, if your child has a different routine at that parent's house, and then you have at yours, then you have to make sure that the routine that you do at your house is very, very consistent.
Right.
Because especially if you're the parent that gets them on the weekends, consistency is learning. You know what I mean? If you're not consistent and you're just kind of doing things on the fly, then they're not going to remember. Like, it's just going to be like, okay, this is cool.
And it's really a toss up for them as to which way of being is what they're going to adopt as their way.
Right.
You know, so, and a lot of times it's whichever one makes them feel the most comfortable.
Or I would say not just comfortable, but the most useful. And
I'm saying what they're going to adopt. If nobody's consistent, most people will.
They're going to go towards comfort.
Right. Yeah. So,
which is not good in the long
important.
term.
It's really important to be intentional about, the standard that you set as far as your routine.
Right. And the reason why it's not good in the long term is because of the fact that life has challenges that require you to be tough. And you know what I mean? Tough enough to just go through it. And so if you only teach your children based on like comfort, or if they only pick up the lessons that give them comfort, then they're not going to remember the things that would require them to, kind of use that perseverance and persist through problems. So having that discipline to just say, okay, well, sometimes you just got to push your way through is going to be important. So I would say, just ultimately, to kind of wrap this up.
I wanted to talk about
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
example. So I also have seen situations where you'll have two parents with a couple of children, and one of them uses the children to try to manipulate the other parent to do things their way. So it's not necessarily of control, like, okay, I want the kids to see me a certain way. It's more of, I'm going to use the children against you. Like, let's say it's a parent that has the children majority of the time. And, they're trying to get the other parent to do things a certain way. So they sort of take advantage of the fact that they have the children more often.
Right.
So they use that against the other parent. Like, how would you handle that situation?
So, to be honest with you, in that situation, the best thing you can do, it's a hard situation to be in, because then the children are leverage against you. Right. And so the problem is that parent may or may not be thinking about what's in the best interest of the child.
Right.
Right. And so the real difficult thing from that perspective is to say, okay, well, even though this person is coming at me specifically and using the children for leverage, this is not a sprint. Right. The short term is always going to leave. And so for me, I would say focus on what is going to happen long term, because if you're what
does that mean?
So for me, what that means is, it's essentially kind of what we've been talking about this whole time is today is going to leave. And so that means that you have to say, okay, well, the reality of it is that this person only can have leverage if I am afraid in the moment to give them control, right? And so it's unfortunate to say it this way, but you kind of are playing a game of chess at that point.
Yeah.
You're playing a game of chess that the person is not good at chess.
Right.
And so they think about things like, I'm going to take your pawn if you don't do what I tell you to do. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you got to say, take the pawn.
Right.
Right. I'm going to sacrifice my pawn today to be the king tomorrow.
Right.
And what that means in terms of parenting, to get rid of the analogy and just speak straight to the point. Sometimes if you're co-parenting with someone that is using the children as leverage against you, you have to say, you know what, you take them. Because the reality of it is that this person also wants to have a life where they don't have to be in that situation all the time. Mm-hmm. Right? And as long as they're not keeping you from speaking to your child or being somehow in that child's life, then you're going to be able to outlast them.
Right.
If they can use that as a way to get you to be emotional, then a lot of people feel like they've won.
Right, yeah.
And so you're actually, by reacting to them, you're actually conditioning them to continue to go back to that same well.
Yeah. So
you cannot react to them in a way that shows them any anger or resentment, because then that's more leverage for them to use against you.
Right.
You have to always approach it from the perspective of, this is a long-term game.
Yeah, pick your battles. I mean, if it's something that really is pushing your boundaries, be clear about that, but you don't have to win every battle. Not every conflict has to even be a battle. I mean, if it's something that, they're trying to manipulate you into doing or whatever, and it's not something that's such a big deal, it's not going to cost you anything, or, what I'm trying to say? Push your boundaries, basically.
Right.
Then, give them whatever it is they're seeking. I mean,
I would say even if it pushes your boundaries, I would say this: it's better to lose right now and be able to explain it later. Because, and here's the thing: at some point in your child's life, your child will ask you questions that you will have the answer to, that doesn't, as long as you have built trust with them, right? And this is the key. Don't damage your trust by fighting the person who's using them as leverage.
Right.
Right? Because if you don't seem like the person that they can trust, because you act this way with me and then you fight mommy or you fight daddy, then it becomes a situation where they don't know who to trust, because both they can't tell who's the stable one.
Right.
Right. And so if they are the stable one, they won't trust either of you.
Right.
So you have to maintain self-control.
And you have to humble yourself and not make it about needing to be the one in control. I mean, that's all it really is just a control game. And so it's like, if the other person, if they need whatever to make themselves feel like they're in control, then whatever. It's not something that you have to react to.
Right. And I will say this, and this is something that I've learned. What I've learned a lot about in terms of dealing with people who are difficult is that an apology starting the conversation is oftentimes the best way to pacify the egotistical side of people.
Right.
Right. And so that's the hard part that I think most people struggle with, is that I don't want to be the one to apologize because I'm not wrong.
Right.
It doesn't matter. The point is that
realize
as long
what
as
the
they're
goal is.
Yeah, as long as they're ego driven, right? As long as you don't quench that ego, they can't listen. It's not that they won't, it's that they cannot. So sometimes you really have to be the bigger person that says, hey, I'm sorry. This is all I was trying to say, right? And I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Right? If you say that, you've essentially empowered them enough on their ego to feel like they've won. And sometimes because of that, they'll be like, you know what? I'm sorry too. Because
Don't count on
X,
it,
Y, and
but
Z.
yeah.
Yeah, they may not. They might be like, yeah, that's what I thought, blah, 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 blah. But guess what?
But know that
you
you're
still
winning.
win. The result is what you're after. You're not after a feeling. You're after the result.
You're
and the
not
result
after
is that
making it seem. You're not after the goal of seeming like you're in control, because that's irrelevant. You just want to make sure you're in your kid's life and that you have an impact on them. That's the ultimate goal. So whatever you got to do to make the other person, get their guard down or whatever you got to do, just do it. You know what I mean? Humble yourself.
And this is a part of, unfortunately, this is a part of playing the game of chess with people. Is that sometimes if people are being manipulative, you have to fight fire with fire. And so you have to learn how to be, I think it's like Tai Chi is what the art is, but Tai Chi when it's words, right? If you're using your power against me in an aggressive way, I have to use your power against you in a passive way. You get what I'm saying? And vice versa. Until we can get to a point where we are both assertive in saying what we need and saying what we want without being passive aggressive, I have to use your flow to empower myself. And I have to make it seem like you've won to win.
Right.
You know what I mean? So anyway, that's how I would approach somebody who's co-parenting with you that is being manipulative themselves. Right. And here's the thing is a lot of times people who are manipulative as an adult were manipulative as children and never learned that it wasn't good to manipulate, or that what they're doing is manipulation in the first place. And so they are not, you can't say that it's 100% their fault. Right. And so ultimately you just have to accept people for who they are, where they are. And the fact that you had a child with them, you have to realize that there was something about you that in a way attracted that. Mm-hmm. So deal with your, self-control is really what I'm saying. You have to learn to control yourself.
Humble yourself. I always keep saying that because it takes a lot of humility to back down and resist the urge of fighting somebody, especially when they're in the wrong. Right.
And a lot of times that means getting off the phone, taking a breather, call back the next day or something like that, and just be like, sometimes you don't even have to deal with that person. And that's why I kind of handle things more from a business perspective is like the only reason why we still have a relationship a lot of times when it comes to co-parenting is because there are children involved. If there weren't children involved, you probably wouldn't talk to this person. So understand that, go back to it and say, hey, what's important is the kids.
Right.
So you have anything else?
No, okay. I think we're good.
So that'll be it for this episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to ask a question or just reach out to us and say hi, you can find us on Instagram at What's Better Than Great. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube for not just motivational stuff or stuff like this, but we have like meditation music, things like that. So be sure to check that out. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is Mike.
And Shauna.
And we'll talk to you next time.